So you just got done watching Evil Dead Burn and you want to discuss the story, the lore, the themes, the ending, and of course those two post-credit scenes. Well, you come to the right place. Director Sebastian Vinnicek didn't waste any time constructing an overly complicated story. Instead, he takes the familiar Evil Dead formula, a cursed book, a demonic possession, a group trapped together, and he reintroduces an important element, which is a weapon that is capable of permanently destroying a Deadite. But underneath the blood, broken bones, burning bodies, and more gore than most horror films would know what to do with, this is also a story about domestic violence, generational trauma, and a family that was already destroying itself long before the Deadites arrived. Now today we'll be breaking down the entire plot, we'll be explaining Alice's final confrontation with Will, we'll be discussing the return of both Jessica and Ellie from Evil Dead Rise, and lastly we'll be discussing what this ending could mean for the future of the franchise. Now, obviously, there will be massive spoilers for Evil Dead Burn, as well as spoilers from the previous films as well, so grab your chainsaw, or in this case, grab your weed whacker and jackhammer, and let's break down Evil Dead Burn. Now, before we get to the end, let's start from the beginning before all the hell breaks loose. The movie begins by introducing us to Joseph Price, who's at the family lake house that he inherited from his late grandfather by the name of Benjamin. We learn pretty quickly that Benjamin was a part of an organization known as the Circle of the Wise Men, which is a group dedicated to locating information about the Book of the Dead, as they are trying to discover a way to fight the entities summoned through it. Now, Benjamin's research suggests that Deadites can temporarily be stopped through bodily destruction, but he was searching for something more permanent as a method of sending these demonic entities back to hell. Now, that search led him to the Kandarian Dagger. Now, I recently rewatched all the films prior to watching this new one, so as soon as the dagger was mentioned, I knew exactly where we've heard it before. Now, for those who don't remember, this dagger has appeared throughout the Evil Dead franchise, but in this film, it's given a much greater significance. In Benjamin's recordings, the dagger is one of the only known weapons capable of destroying the demonic force inside of a body. But here is the problem. The Deadites are able to sense the dagger's presence, as we'll see later in the film. Benjamin warns that uncovering it or even drawing attention to this research will act as like a back signal to the Deadites. Once the Deadites realize the Price family possesses the dagger, they will stop at nothing to recover it. Now, it's funny because I've already seen the online conversations about our character Joseph here being not only the worst son, but a bad boyfriend and a terrible brother-in-law. And you know what? They are not wrong, because what he does next is the reason behind all the madness for the rest of the film. Now, instead of Joseph appreciating the importance and the warning of these findings, he treats them as an inspiration for his novel that he keeps claiming he wants to write. Now, we get a little bit of tidbits throughout the movie about Joseph, and he seems to be someone that wants to be a writer, but he actually doesn't want to do the writing. But again, Joseph's digging through his grandfather's material awakens something much worse than writer's block. Now, he doesn't know it, but he would end up calling the Deadites directly to his family. Now, the film connects Benjamin's work to Professor Raymond Noby, the archaeologist whose recording and research helped unleash the evil in the original films. Now, that reference places Benjamin within a much larger network of people who have studied different versions of the Book of the Dead across different generations. Now, discovering this secret organization in this opening scene definitely sets up what we might be able to see in the prequel, which we'll be talking about later in this breakdown. Now, before the Price family's nightmare begin, the movie brings us back to a familiar Deadite. And that Deadite is no other than Jessica, who we met at the lake at the beginning and the end of Evil Dead Rise. This sequence here to me was hands down one of my favorite scenes of the film, as we see Jessica emerging from the water and she attacks and ultimately kills the two friends who were out fishing. One of them died by being ripped in half, and the other one died by being boiled alive in the water. Now, this sequence establishes that Evil Dead Burn takes place after the events of Evil Dead Rise, with Jessica serving as the connective tissue between the two different stories. Now, it's never revealed how much time has passed between the two different films, but it was long enough to have created some type of urban legend about a woman in the lake. Now, back to Jessica. Again, Joseph's research basically attracted the demonic force as she moves towards the Price family to retrieve the dagger, as we watch her patiently awaiting to cross paths with Will. Now, before moving on into more of the story, let's briefly talk about the Price family. Film establishes that they were already a dysfunctional family before any supernatural things started to happen. It's clear that Joseph is directionless, his parents Susan and Edgar are angry and judgmental, Grandma Polly drifts in and out of coherence because of her dementia, and then that leaves us with Will. From the moment we meet him, we can clearly see that he's controlling, he's paranoid, and emotionally abusive towards his wife Alice. It's clear in the scene where they're out celebrating Joseph's birthday at the club and throughout the film that Alice is quiet around the family, and it's easy to understand why. The various flashbacks we get from Alice when she's triggered by violence in the film, you can understand that she spent years while they were together monitoring everything she says and does because she knows how quickly Will can become aggressive. Now, after a senseless argument between the married couple at Joseph's birthday, we see Will drives away drunk in his car back home despite Joseph and Alice trying to stop him. Now, it's here that we tie back to Jessica waiting in the woods as Will crashes directly into her. Now, the collision tears Jessica apart across the windshield as her head slowly comes off of her body, but before Will cars explodes, we see she recites the indentation from the Necronomicon as the possession transfers from Jessica into Will. Now, Will's death forces the family to come back together, but it also allows the Deadites to infiltrate the one environment where Alice is least likely to be believed or protected. Now, sometime after the crash, we see the family gathering for Will's cremation. Now, Susan and Edgar make it very clear that they blame Alice for what happened to their son because in their eyes, Will was just this perfect son whose wife drove him into a self-destructive mindset. Now, this is an example of one of the central themes in the film, and that being that the Price family was already willing to ignore Will's behavior. Now, after the awkward ceremony, Edgar privately visits his son's coffin before he's cremated. But this is where Will's possessed corpse breaks free and he grabs Edgar and kills the employee watching what happens. Edgar survives the encounter, but he has been infected as everyone returns to the lake house where Edgar slowly begins to transform. Now, this is where we get one of the most controversial moments, in my opinion, and that's during the dinner scene. Now, at this point, Edgar has already tried to take his own life as the possession takes over his mind and body, and after going back and forth over Alice wanting to go back home and live with her family and not wanting to run the restaurant anymore, we see Edgar stabs the family dog, Max. Now look, I have seen my fair share of dogs being hurt or injured or killed in movies and TV before. I mean, even in 2013's Evil Dead, we saw Mia and what she did to the family dog, even though that wasn't shown on screen. But here, seeing Max getting stabbed in the way that he did, as a lover of animals, and particularly a lover of dogs, because I am a dog owner, to me, this was the most brutal scene of the film. Now, Joseph and his girlfriend Thya attempt to drive Edgar to the hospital, which leads to one of the more technically impressive sequences of the film. Now, inside the car, Edgar attacks his son and Thya, cutting her fingers off with the car door and tossing his son around like a rag doll, basically turning this into one of the worst car rides of all time. And at this point, this is where the film just hits the gas pedal and never lets go. What I loved about this scene was how it used everything available inside the car as a weapon, right? We have the doors, we have the seat belts, we have the headrests, and even the sunroof was being used in this brutal scene. Now, eventually the car crashes, and this is where Joseph really showed his true colors as a coward, as he escapes and leaves his demonic dad in the car with his girlfriend, as he didn't even shoot his dad to slow him down, and unfortunately, we watch as Edgar murders his girlfriend and then passes the possession into her. Meanwhile, back at the house, we see Alice discovers Benjamin's research, and she nearly makes the classic Evil Dead mistake by reciting the words from the Book of the Dead, but she's interrupted by the possessed version of Max. Now, Alice is forced to kill the family dog yet again, even though Max will be coming back a little bit later, as Joseph reaches the house and Thya arrives shortly after, but she's no longer herself.
Your perfect family.
Now, the family locks Deadite Thya in the basement, giving us a tradition in this franchise, which is locking someone in the cellar. Now, one of my favorite things about this franchise is the use of the Deadites. They're not only violent and sometimes come with a little bit of evil sense of humor, but they use the knowledge of the person they're possessing against their victims. And we definitely see that strategy being used and applied a lot in this film, and maybe more than any of the previous films before. These Deadites manipulate each member using intimate knowledge and their insecurities and resentments and relationships as Thya tricks Polly into releasing her. Now, once she is freed, she attacks the family and demands the location of the dagger. Now, for the first time in the movie, we watch as Joseph actually makes a move and gains some courage as he overpowers Thya and smashes her head in with the door of the dishwasher. But before that, Thya managed to infect Polly by swapping saliva in Polly's fake teeth. From here, Polly then manipulates Susan, exploding her grief over Will and her need to protect her image of her perfect family. Susan allows Edgar back inside, but before that, I don't know if we've ever seen a Deadite make out with another person. Again, the saliva we see in this scene here, and something that I mentioned in my review of the film is these Deadites reminded me of like vampires, right? We see the transferring of the possession, right? It's almost like a vampire biting someone, and we see the transfer of the saliva or in the blood. Now, we, of course, have seen the transfer of the blood in the previous films, but I can't think of saliva being used so much in that transfer, but also in regards to like the look of the Deadites. They kind of had like a vampire-ish look, almost like 30 Days and Nights in my opinion. And then lastly, the whole idea of like Edgar couldn't get into the house without like being almost invited in, like a vampire would have to be invited in to attack their victims. So again, I kind of like that added on nature or that uniqueness of these Deadites that they kind of reminded me again of vampires. But to speak to the decision made by Susan, this is something that is a flaw of her character, and that is she'll rather welcome a monster wearing her husband's face than acknowledge that her family has become dangerous. Again, after kissing her possessed husband, we see that her transfer begins to happen as she's slowly becoming a Deadite herself. Again, we watch as the Deadites use the manipulation tactic as Edgar previously promised his wife that he wouldn't hurt their son, but as soon as he's let in, he immediately breaks that promise and attacks Joseph. Now, this is yet another example of an incredible set piece, and this was actually a scene that was a part of the teaser trailer of this film, and that is the scene where we see Joseph and Susan being thrown around the house. We see Edgar gliding in the air. Like, I love this scene so much, even though it was obviously given to us months ago, but we now have the context, and it was also in the third act, which I'm surprised they gave away that big scene. But nonetheless, it was definitely one of my favorite scenes in the film. And ultimately, this is where Joseph ends up dying. Now, Alice is now surrounded by the possessed remains of the same family that spent years protecting Will and treating her like an outsider. But now that outsider is about to become the only person capable of surviving. As Alice hides from the Deadites, the film finally reveals the full extent of Will's abuse. Through the flashbacks, we see that their marriage was violent and controlling. Will isolated Alice, intimidating her and conditioned her to doubt her own ability to fight back. Now, Susan and Edgar either ignored the warning signs or, in my opinion, they actively refused to believe her. We see Alice tie Susan up in the bathroom and demands that she finally acknowledge what Will did to her. Susan admits that she never trusted Alice and always resented her. Even before becoming fully possessed, we see Susan chose her son's reputation over Alice's safety. This is to me what makes these Deadites effective within this particular story, because they don't need to invent emotional wounds. They just simply crawl inside the wounds that were never allowed to heal. The Price family repeatedly claims the family is everything to them, but their definition of family is based on silence, loyalty, and denial, and really nothing about love. Again, just looking at these various different characters, from Will's abuse being protected, and like someone like Joseph, his lack of direction is mocked rather than understood. And then you look at the parents. You have Edgar's anger throughout the film that dominated every interaction, even before he became a Deadite. And then Susan treated anyone challenging her family and the perception of her family as like a personal attack. Again, in my eyes, the supernatural possession just became an extension of the existing cycle that was already there. Now, at this point, we see Alice escapes into the attic and finally discovers the dagger hidden amongst Benjamin's belongings. But this is where Joseph attacks her, but in this moment, the film shows what the dagger is actually capable of doing. Alice stabs Joseph with it, and unlike the other Deadites, he appears to be permanently damaged as he comes back to his regular self as he dies in the moment. Now, after getting rid of Polly, who we'll talk about a little bit later, Susan is now pursuing Alice, as well as we have Edgar chasing her. And this is where we see Alice climbs up to the roof, and she unfortunately loses the dagger as she is trying to run from them. Now, Susan and Edgar chase after her, forcing her to re-enter the house through the chimney, which was such a cool scene. We see Alice uses the weapon to slice Susan's face in half, and then she ultimately uses the weapon to kill Edgar, and she sets the rest of the house on fire. Which, by the way, the burning down of the house ties into the burn subtitle of this movie, as the house contains Benjamin's research, the Price family history, and the generations buried of secrets. So by destroying it, Alice isn't just killing the Deadites, she's burning down the institution of the sorts that protected Will. She's also destroying the physical embodiment of the Price's family's denial, in my opinion, as Alice retrieves the dagger and uses it against the still possessed Max. But the nightmare isn't finished, as Will finally makes his return back home. Now, in this final confrontation, we see Alice gets away from the burning lake house and she enters this construction site. Now, in this final showdown, again, diving deeper into the themes and everything this film was tackling, defeating Will isn't like just defeating a Deadite, right? He's the physical manifestation of the abuse she thought that she had escaped when he died. His death didn't immediately free her because his family continued blaming her, silencing her, and protecting his memory. So for Alice to survive, she must destroy both the literal monster in front of her and the idolized version of Will that his family maintained. During the struggle, we see Alice ends up getting a pipe stuck into her ankle, which was so gross, but she ends up trapping Will inside the pit filled with tar. She eventually attacks him with a jackhammer before using a dagger to finish off the job. Now, I thought it was funny how they kind of subverted expectations because we're so used to seeing the traditional chainsaw being used in a climax, so I thought that was a nice way to kind of flip things on its head. Now, the importance of what Alice does in this moment, again, not just defeating a Deadite, but defeating her husband, she doesn't just escape or have someone rescue her in this moment. She looks him directly in the eyes and she chooses to fight back, and she's the one that ends her abusive cycle that her husband showed on her. Now, as we end the film, we see the sunrise comes, the paramedics arrive, and the sunrise is something that's very familiar and like a pattern within this franchise. When the final girl or the final guy, like Ash, for example, survives the night of impossible violence and emerges into the morning completely transformed. But speaking of the final girl, this is what I like about the Alice character and comparing it to what we got with Mia, but also Ash and also Beth. Thinking about all of our main survivors in the film franchise, you have Ash, who survived through bravado. We have Mia, who survived addiction and self-destruction. You have Beth, who survives by becoming the mother figure for her soon-to-be born child, but also her niece. And then you look at Alice. She survives by rejecting the idea that marriage and grief or family loyalty requires her to continue struggling. The Price family treated Alice as though she didn't belong, and ironically, being the outsider of the family system is exactly what allowed her to realize the toxicity and ultimately destroy it. Now, speaking of destroyed, there is something that she forgot to destroy, and that is the remaining Deadite back at the lake house, which is revealed to be Polly, who's escaped the burning house. This leads us into our first post-credit scene where we see a civilian finds the crawling Polly and tries to help her, but Polly switches into this nice old lady into her demonic presence of a Deadite as she scratches the person's leg, transferring the possession into this person, which lets us know that the Deadite infection is still spreading. Now, the Price family has been destroyed and the dagger has survived, but the demonic force is now moving into another unsuspecting victim. Now, this leads us directly into our second post-credit scene. Now, we head back to the crematorium. The manager and I believe her young daughter are organizing these unclaimed urns as she talks about these are the people that the families don't come back from them. Now, the daughter begins reading the names attached to the urns, and one of the names is Ellie. Obviously, we know Ellie is the mother of evil, played by the incredible Alyssa Sutherland in Evil Dead Rise. Now, the young girl hears a voice and assumes her mother has returned, but she turns around and looks in the mirror and she sees Deadite Ellie reflecting behind her. Ellie reflects the girl's movements before physically appearing in the room and ultimately killing the girl as she declares that mommy is back. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was confused as hell about this post-credit scene because obviously we last saw Ellie, she died. So let me just share with you all my possible different interpretations of this post-credit scene. Now, my first thought is that Ellie's remains were recovered following the apartment massacre and eventually was sent to be cremated. Now, obviously, this explanation creates some problems because last time, again, we saw Ellie, she was fused together with her kids, Bridget and Danny, and ultimately split in half. Her body was destroyed. So how is she physically back into her body? Which brings me to my second idea, which is a more interesting possibility, which is that the urn isn't literally containing Ellie's intact spirit. Instead, the demonic force may be using Ellie's image because she's become one of the preferred forms. As we know, Deadites normally weaponize the memories and emotions of their victims, so Ellie's appearance could be a projection rather than a ghost, even though she was able to kill that girl with her own hands. But again, that will contradict the rules that was already established in this franchise, which if we're being honest, the rules are kind of broken from movie to movie anyway. But again, just going off of the past history, traditionally, Deadites possesses physical bodies. Once a host is destroyed, the demon moves on rather than continuing to appear as that particular person. So that leaves me with my third option, and the honest answer probably is that the scene is just really for fan service. And there was also an article that I read that the director said that the studio was the one that really highly recommended that they added in these post-credit scenes. So honestly, I think the reason why Ellie is back is because the studio knows that she's one of the more popular characters, and particularly in the Deadites, and they just wanted to have some fan service in my eyes. But if you all think differently, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on why we saw Ellie back. Does this mean we're going to see her in the future? I'll be discussing that in a little bit later, but again, let me know how you all interpreted that second post-credit scene with Ellie, the mother of evil, making a return. Now, speaking of Alice, what can we expect from the character next? Obviously, she's alive as the film ends, and she still has the dagger in her possession, which in my eyes makes her one of the most important characters in the franchise. And right now, we know that Mia survived. She's still out there. Beth and her niece is still out there. So my question is, will the franchise have like all the survivors and all the different versions of the book, all the different evils out there fighting against each other, and have like this major crossover with all the characters meeting each other for the first time to ultimately take down the evil with the use of the dagger? And going back to what we learned in this film, which again was the circle of the wise men, could the organization put them all together, like being like a Nick Fury of the Avengers? And when again, we have all these survivors. Maybe Ash comes out of retirement, because I know Bruce Campbell has retired the character, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, Bruce Campbell made a cameo on the family photo when we saw Polly going up the stairs, which implies that he was actually the grandfather and the husband of Polly. So that's an interesting connection there. So again, I'm very curious to know if we're going to get, again, this crazy crossover of all the survivors, including Ash, coming to team up to finally take down evil. Now, speaking of evil, what is next in the Evil Dead franchise? The next announced film is Evil Dead Wrath, which is coming out in 2028. Now, this will serve as a prequel, as it is set in 1972, meaning that it is actually expected to predate the original Cabin story rather than immediately continue the story of Alice. Now, to me, that opens up the door to so many different possibilities. For example, the film could explore the earlier discovery of one of the books of the dead. But also, what we learned in this movie, maybe we'll find out more about the circle of wise men. I could see the story following Benjamin Price, maybe even learning more about the professor and other researchers first becoming aware of the different volumes of the Book of the Dead. With all that being said, that will end our breakdown of Evil Dead Burn. So, final thoughts. I really enjoyed this film. Again, I said it in my review that it's definitely a gory film, maybe one of the goriest ones in the franchise, but I enjoyed all the performances, and I just love the innovation from the director, the camera work, the score. Like, this film, I know it's not for everyone, but I really enjoy these modern takes on the franchise. I love the originals, don't get me wrong, and I have a ranking that you all can check out, but I thoroughly enjoyed this film because in my eyes, It wasn't really interested in reinventing the formula in a franchise, but instead it just asks a question like how far of this formula can be pushed into new boundaries. So let me know in the comments below, what did you all think of Evil Dead Burn? What Easter eggs, what deeper meanings you all take away? What were some of your favorite moments, least favorite moments? Do you all think the film maybe went too far in the gore, or did it not go far enough? What again were your favorite characters? Do you all have some of these Deadites in your top 5, which I will be sharing a video about that in regards to my rankings of all the Deadites of this film? Do you all think that we will see Alice or Mia or Beth or Ash coming back and crossing paths in the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all for making it to this point of the video. If you all are watching this on YouTube, I appreciate you all. If you can do me a favor, if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button, and at the same time, make sure you hit the hype button. If you guys didn't mind, hit the share button. Share this to anyone, everyone you know that loves this franchise like we do. And again, leave your thoughts in the comments. And last but not least, if you enjoy these type of videos, consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel today. Now, for those listening to this via podcast, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or wherever you all get your podcasts from, I appreciate you all. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, stick around by following the podcast, and I would love it if you all can give me a 5-star review. Alrighty, y'all. Thanks again for watching or listening. And remember, just because the body has been burned doesn't mean that the evil is dead. Alrighty, y'all. Don't forget, you all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll see you again soon.